Chapter 5, Wherein everything seems strange because everything is logical. The chapel of the Holy Angels, which lies on the right hand as you enter the church of St. Sulpice, was hidden behind a scaffolding of planks. Abbe Petuil, Monsieur Gaetan, Monsieur Maurice, and his nephew, and Monsieur Sariette entered in a single file through the low door cut in the wooden hoarding and found old Guinardon on the top of his ladder, standing in front of the Heliodorus. The old artist, surrounded by all sorts of tools and materials, was putting a white paste in the crack, which cut into the high priest Onius, Irene, Paul Baldry's favorite model, Zeph Irene, who had lent her golden hair and polished shoulders to so many Magdalens, Marguerites, Lifts, and mermaids, and who it is said was beloved of the Emperor Napoleon III, was standing at the foot of the ladder with tangled locks and cadaverous cheeks and dim eyes, older than old Guinardon, whose life she had shared for more than half a century. She had brought the painter's lunch in a basket, although the slanting rays fell gray and cold through the leaded and iron-barred window. Delacroix's coloring shone resplendent, and the roses on the cheeks of men and angels dimmed with their glorious beauty the rubicund countenance of old Guinardon, which stood out in relief against one of the temple's columns. Those frescoes of the chapel of the Holy Angels, though derided and insulted when they first appeared, have now become part of the classic tradition and are united in immortality. The masterpieces of Rubens and Tintoretto, old Guinardon, bearded and long-haired, looked like a father time, effacing the works of man's genius. Gaetan, in alarm, called out to him, "Carefully, Monsieur Guinardon, carefully. Do not scrape too much." The painter reassured him. "Fear nothing, Monsieur Gaetan. I do not paint in that style. My art is a higher one. I work after the manner of Cimabue, Giotto, and Beato. Angelico, not in the style of Delacroix. This surface here is too heavily charged with contrast and opposition to give a really sacred effect. It is true that Chenavard said that Christianity loves the picturesque, but Chenavard was a rascal with neither faith nor principle, an infidel. Look, Monsieur d'Espavu, I fill up the crevice. I relay the scales of paint which are peeling. That is all. The damage due to the sinking of the wall, or more probably to a seismic shock, is confined to a very small space. As painting oil and wax applied on a very dry foundation is far more solid, one might think. I saw Delacroix engaged on this work, impassioned but anxious. He modeled feverishly, scrapped out, repainted unceasingly. His mighty hand made childish blunders, but the thing is done with the mastery of a genius and the inexperience of a schoolboy. It is a marvel how it holds. The good man was silent and went on filling in the crevice. How classic and traditional the composition is, said Gaetan. Time was when one could recognize nothing but its amazing novelty. Now one can see in it a multitude of old Italian formulas. I may allow myself the luxury of being just. I possess the qualifications, said the old man from the top of his lofty ladder. Delacroix lived in a blasphemous and godless age, a painter of decadence. He was not without pride nor grandeur. He was greater than his times, but he lacked faith, single-heartedness, and purity. To be able to see and paint angels, he needed that virtue of angels and primitives, the supreme virtue. With God's help, I do my best to practice chastity. Hold your tongue. Mikel, you are as big a brute as any of them. Thus, Zephyrine, devoured with jealousy because that very morning on the stairs she had seen her lover kiss the breadwoman's daughter, to wit, the youthful Octavie, who was as squalid and radiant as one of Rembrandt's brides. She had loved Mikel madly in the happy days long since past, and love had never died out in Zephyrine's heart. Old Guinardon received the flattering insult with a smile that he dissembled, and raised his eyes to the ceiling where the archangel Michael, terrible in azure cuirass and gilt helmet, was springing heavenwards in all the radiance of his glory. Meanwhile, Abbe Petuli, blinking and shielding his eyes with his hat against the glaring light from the window, began to examine the pictures one after another. Heliodorus being scourged by the angels, St. Michael vanquishing the demons, and the combat of Jacob and the angel. All this is exceedingly fine, he murmured at last. But why has the artist only represented the wrathful angels on these walls? Look, where I will in this chapel, I see but heralds of celestial anger, ministers of divine vengeance. God wishes to be feared. He wishes also to be loved. I would fain perceive on these walls messengers of peace and of clemency. I should like to see the seraphim. He purified the lips of the prophet. Saint Raphael, who gave his back his sight to old Tobias. Gabriel, who announced the mystery of the incarnation of Mary. The angel who delivered Saint Peter from his chains. The cherubim who bore the dead Saint Catherine to the top of Sinai. Above all, I should like to be able to contemplate those heavenly guardians which God gives to every man baptized in his name. We each have one who follows all our steps, who comforts us and upholds us. It would be pleasant indeed to admire these enchanting spirits, these beautiful faces. Ah, Abbe, it depends on the point of view, answered Gaetan. Delacroix was no sentimentalist. Old Ingres was not very far wrong in saying that this great man's work reeks of fire and brimstone. Look at the somber, splendid beauty of those angels. Look at those androgynes, so proud and fierce, at those pitiless youths who lift avenging rods against Heliodorus. Note this mysterious wrestler touching the patriarch on the hip. Hush, said Abbe Hatuil. According to the Bible, he is no angel like the others. If he be an angel, he is the angel of creation, the eternal Son of God. I am surprised that the venerable curé of Saint Sulpice, who entrusted the decoration of this chapel to Monsieur Eugene Delacroix, did not tell him that the patriarch's symbolic struggle with him, who was nameless, took place in profound darkness, and that the subject is quite out of place here, since it prefigures the incarnation of Jesus Christ. The best artists go astray when they fail to obtain their ideas of Christian iconography from a qualified ecclesiastic. The institutions of Christian art form the subject of numerous works with which you are doubtless acquainted. Monsieur Sariette was gazing vacantly about him. It was the third morning after his adventurous night in the library. Being, however, thus called upon by the venerable ecclesiastic, he pulled himself together and replied, on this subject we may with advantage consult Molinus, de Historiae Sacrarum Imaginum et Pictorarum, in the edition given us by Noel Bacot, dated Louvain, 1771, of the Common Era. Cardinal Frederico Borromeo de Pictura Sacra and the iconography of Diderot, but this last work must be read with caution. Having thus spoken, Monsieur Sariette relapsed into silence. He was pondering on his devastated library. On the other hand, continued Ebbe Petuil, since an example of the holy anger of the angels was necessary in this chapel, the painter is to be commended for having depicted for us, in imitation of Raphael, the heavenly messengers who chastised Heliodorus, ordered by Seleucus, king of Assyria, to carry off the treasures contained in the temple. Heliodorus was stricken by an angel in a cuirass of gold mounted on a magnificently caparisoned steed. 2 other angels smote him with rods. He fell to earth as Monsieur Delacroix shows us here, and was swallowed up in darkness. It is right and salutary that this adventure should be cited as an example to the Republican commissioners of police and to the sacrilegious agents of the law. There will always be Heliodorises, but let it be known, every time they lay their hands on the property of the church, which is the property of the poor, they shall be chastised with rods and blinded by angels. I should like this painting, or better still, Raphael's sublimer conception of the same subject, to be engraved in little pictures, fully colored, and distributed as rewards in all the schools. Uncle, said young Maurice with a yawn, I think these things are simply ghastly. I prefer Matisse and Metzinger. These words fell unheeded, and the old Guenardon from his ladder held forth. Only the primitives caught a glimpse of heaven. Beauty is only to be found between the 13th and 15th centuries. The antique and impure antique, which regains its pernicious influence over the minds of the 16th century, inspired poets and painters with criminal notions and immodest conceptions, with horrid impurities, filth. All the artists of the Renaissance were swine, including Michelangelo. Then perceiving that Gaetan was on the point of departure, here Guenardon assumed an air of bonhomie and said to him in a confidential tone, Monsieur Gaetan, if you are not afraid of climbing up my 5 flights, come and have a look at my den. I've got 2 or 3 little canvases I wouldn't mind parting with, and they might interest you. All good, honest, straightforward stuff. I'll show you, among other things, a tasty, spicy little Baudouin that would make your mouth water. At this speech, Gaetan made off. As he descended the church steps and turned down the Rue Princesse, found himself accompanied by old Sariette, and fell to unburdening himself to him, as he would have done to any human creature, or indeed to a tree, a lamppost, a dog, or his own shadow. The indignation with which the aesthetic theories of the old painter inspired him. Old Guenardon overdoes it with his Christian art and his primitives. Whatever the artist conceives of heaven is borrowed from earth. God, the virgin, angels, men and women, saints, the light, the clouds. When he was designing figures for this chapel windows at Dreux, old Ingres drew from life a pure, fine study of a woman, which may be seen among many others in Musée Bonnat at Bayonne. At Bayonne. Old Ingres had written at the bottom of the page, in case he should forget, Mademoiselle Cecile admirable legs and thighs, and so as to make Mademoiselle Cecile into a saint. In paradise, he gave her a robe, a cloak, a veil, inflicting thus a shameful decline in her estate, for the tissues of Lyons and Genoa are worthless compared with the youthful living tissue rosy with pure blood, the most beautiful draperies are despicable compared with the lines of a beautiful body. In fact, clothing for flesh that is desirable and ripe for wedlock is an unmerited shame and the worst of humiliations. And Gaetan, walking carelessly in the gutter of Rue Garanciere, continued, Old Guinardon is a pestilential idiot. He blasphemes antiquity, sacred antiquity, the age when the gods were kind. He exalts an epoch when the painter and the sculptor had all their lessons to learn over again. In point of fact, Christianity has run contrary to art in so much as it has not favored the study of the nude. Art is the representation of nature, and nature is preeminently the human body. It is the nude. Pardon, purred old Sariette. There is such a thing as spiritual, or one might term it inward beauty, which, since the days of Fra Angelico down to those of Hippolyte Flandrin, Christian art has. But Gaetan, never hearing a word of all this, went on hurling his impetuous observations at the stones of the old street and the snow-laden clouds overhead. The primitives cannot be judged as a whole, for they are utterly unlike each other. This old madman confounds them altogether. Cimabue is a corrupt Byzantine. Giotto gives hints of a powerful genius, but his modeling is bad, and like children, he gives all his characters the same face. The early Italians have grace and joy because they are Italians. The Venetians have an instinct for fine color. But when all is said and done, these exquisite craftsmen enamel and gild rather than paint. There is far too much softness about the heart and coloring of your saintly Angelico for me. As for the Flemish school, that's quite another pair of shoes. They can use their hands in glory of workmanship. They are on a level with the Chinese upper workers. The technique of the brothers Van Eyck is a marvel, but I cannot discover in their adoration of the Lamb the charm and mystery that some have vaunted. Everything in it is treated with the pitiless perfection. It is vulgar in feeling and cruelly ugly. Memling may touch one perhaps, but he creates nothing but sick wretches and cripples. Under the heavy, rich, and ungraceful robing of his virgins and saints, one divines some very lamentable autonomy. I did not wait for Rogier van der Weyden to call himself Roger de la Pasteur and turn Frenchman in order to prefer him to Memling. This Roger, or Rogier, is less of a ninny, but then he is more lugubrious, and the rigidity of his lines bears eloquent testimony to his poverty-stricken figures. It is a strange perversion to take pleasure in these carnivalesque figures when one can have the paintings of Leonardo, Titian, Correggio, Velasquez, Rubens, Rembrandt, Poussin, or Prudhon. Really, it is a perverted instinct. Meanwhile, the Abbe Petouil and Maurice de Esparvieu were strolling leisurely along the wake of the aesthete and librarian. As a general rule, the Abbe Petouil was little inclined to talk theology with laymen, or for that matter with clerics either. Carried away, however, by the attractiveness of the subject, he was telling the youthful Maurice all about the sacred mission of those guardian angels which Monsieur Delacroix had so inopportunely excluded from his picture. And in order to give more adequate expression to his thoughts on such lofty themes, the Abbe Petouil borrowed whole phrases and sentences from Bossuet. He had gotten them up by heart to put in his sermons, for he adhered strongly to tradition. Yes, my son, he was saying, God has appointed tutelary spirits to be near us. They come to us laden with his gifts. They return laden with our prayers. Such is their task. Not an hour, not a moment passes, but they are at our side, ready to help us, ever fervent and unwearyingly guardians. Watchmen that never slumber, quite so Abbe. Maurice was wondering by what cunning artifice he could get on the soft side of his mother and persuade her to give him some money of which he was urgently in need. And one of the things that a person should look at with this things is, well, Christianity, Paul, the real founder of Christianity put forward this idea that a woman covers her disgrace. And so the opposite was used as a response. Well, we know that modesty and a lack of makeup and stuff like this is actually good for the health. But so anyways, it was extremism on both sides of that issue of modesty and the human body, that sort of stuff. But the primitives, what did the primitives do? The primitives used art to convey information, didactic. They wanted to record experience, they wanted to put out experience. And you find that the artists that even painted churches encoded stuff that they would have known was, it wasn't that they were ill-informed, it's they were trying to sneak some stuff in, some hidden messages about stuff they figured out, or or stuff they believed. And when people are doing restorations, they should also regard that too as like, what might be lost if I try to make it better? And of course, one may know that I was part of a church that they altered the paintings to give them more clothing. I mean, when they redid they hired artists to paint more clothing on the versions of the paintings of old that they put forward as their church paintings.